We are on.
All right, guys. Welcome back to the Fitness in Philosophy podcast. My name is Robbie Gustin, and I'm joined by OPEX fitness founder James FitzGerald. James, when
Hey there, everyone.
when things kind of finish up with COVID, hopefully sometime this year, we'll
hmm
see. Um, what's your favorite place to travel to? Where do you want to head to?
Yeah, I don't have a great question. I don't have a favorite place, but I do have an itch, and it comes from a lot of travel as a kid. I was born in a northern Canada isolated community, and through my sporting experience, I was just telling my wife about this on a walk the other night. For grade 10, 11, and 12, every second weekend from September to May, really, I was out of town, like flying out of town for sport,
Oh,
community sport, different kinds of things. So, ironically, I missed 80 days of school in the last year in grade 12.
oh my gosh.
Think about that. But I had the capability of doing some homework on the road and having some, anyways. So that's where the see the world feeling came from, and I've been very grateful and fortunate to have a business and money and the opportunity to do that with my family for a long period of time. And so that was embedded, and now this has stopped for a while. So I don't have a favorite place, but I can't wait to do it again. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. How about yourself? Looking to get around, come to AZ, get some sunshine on that skin.
I know, right? Yeah, that'd be nice. Yeah, I mean, I my grandparents traveled to, I think it was like 140 countries. They went to all seven continents and Antarctica twice.
Gosh.
My mom had the got the itch as well. So like I've been to, like, before the age of 18, I'd been to Tibet, Beijing, Tokyo, um, Australia a couple times. So I'm trying to think, where would I, and we moved a lot as a kid. Like so yeah, I moved from New York and then to Dallas and then to Southern California. Um, I'd say probably I think, to me, I'd be curious your thoughts. Like, to me, there's a difference between traveling and vacation.
Yeah, for sure.
Traveling is like, so my mom's a big fan of, like, okay, we go somewhere, we go to Europe, and it's like there's something on the itinerary every single second. That's
Yeah,
like one mode of existence, which I can understand and appreciate. And then
yeah,
there's vacationing, which I'd say I'm currently more of a fan of, which is just like mental break, relax, beach, snowboarding, something like that.
yes, yeah.
Um, we went to Bora Bora once. That was probably the coolest place, or one of the coolest places
I
I've ever
bet.
been. That
I
was pretty
bet.
cool.
Man, you're like Ernest Shackleton.
Who's that?
It was a famous uh, explorer way back in the day that I think sailed the seas of Antarctica, or well, not claim to, but did sailed the seas down there and wrote about the harrowing journey. I think actually the book is called, let's see here, I think it's called Endurance.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, really good. Anyways, the classic explorer that's in you and I, it seems.
Yeah. Well, my mom is, and I'm ultimately glad she did it. I was a little bit worried just with everything, like, just given the timing of when she was going, but it was all pre-COVID. Like, it had been her dream to kind of hold up her picture of her parents in Antarctica while she was in Antarctica. So December 2019, she decided to head down there and took like a icebreaker boat and all the rest of this stuff. And I was like, yeah, we can wait till later. What's the rush? It's no big deal, let's
Um,
just let's wait. And she decided to ultimately go, and then of course this all hit. So she was able to say that she's visited all seven continents and was able to hold up the picture. So that was kind of cool.
that is really cool. Yeah, yeah. I think about the opportunities my children have gotten as thus far as well. They've been to some cool spots, and if you culminate that with my journeys around the globe for education, um, I'm hoping it's going to have a good imprint on them. They want to, because they keep talking about going back to we were in London and Spain, or in England and Spain 2 years ago, and they really enjoyed that. And so because I think they see it as like, they're just they're just the distance is magnified, right? It's like, holy cow, like here we are in this desert, and you open up Google Maps and you go across the ocean way over here, and you open up where we were in Spain, and they just find it fascinating, the whole different world and different culture and language and how people operate. Yet those are other humans, and that's another young girl, and that it's like,
Right.
it's a beautiful opportunity for you to see how small you are in the world, but how collective everything is. So I'm hoping that gave them a little itch, because I didn't have those opportunities as broad of a scale when I was younger. I went to more local, but lots of traveling, but more local, Northeast area. Anyways, what number episode is it today?
This is number 20.
Oh, solid. It's gonna be some form of celebration.
Yeah.
What's 20 years of marriage? What's that considered? The bronze?
Is that the
Silver? No.
gold? I think isn't gold. I think gold is 50. Is that 50?
Yeah.
Trying to deduce from that. Maybe silver is 25, so close to silver.
Okay, cool. So bronze.
Yeah, bronze.
We'll call it bronze. Yeah, well, here's our bronze anniversary.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm trying to remember the exact date, but I think sometime in January last year, you posted a picture of a philosophy book, and I emailed you. And
Yeah,
then that's kind
right.
of how this all started. So
That
that's
was.
kind of cool.
Yeah. I don't know if it was Bertrand Russell, perhaps.
I think it was.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, well, man, the journey's been great thus far. I mean, we haven't fired one another yet, so hey, it's got to be going. It's got to be all up and up.
Yep.
It's got to be a sign. Got to be a sign we're gonna get to 50.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it, and yeah, I think from what I've seen in terms of comments and different things online, like people have been enjoying the discussion, so it's been going well.
That's great. That's great. Well, I'm glad we've contributed in some way, shape, or form to some people's thoughts, and give them some ammunition as to how to go about navigating their thinking.
Yeah, one might say we've had an impact.
Well, let's make that assumption and discuss impact, shall we?
Yes, we shall. All right, guys. So today we're going to discuss impact. The couplet that we're going to do is last time we discussed value, and today we're going to discuss impact. And James and I were discussing pre-call how we could discuss the connection between the two, because they are related, but they are distinct at the same time. So just like we've been doing, I want to start off with a dictionary definition and then talk about some philosophical considerations. So if we talk about impact as a noun, it can be defined as a forceful contact or onset, transitive verb to have direct effect or impact on, to strike forcefully, intransitive to have an impact on, to impinge or make contact, especially forcefully. Now, when I was reading through those, I was thinking back to, I forget what episode, I think it might have been the last one, we were talking about like slapping someone across the face.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of interesting connections.
We'll have to go back and contextualize that, but
yes.
Yeah, we did actually say it. Yeah.
I think
it was in regards to behavior change, right?
Yes. It was like, so you're in a meeting with someone, and we can do this little dance about, a nutrition or fitness client, and we can do this little dance about should you be eating broccoli or should you not, and high intensity interval training, and we were joking about the Zen koan approach, where it's like, just whoa, I just woke up. What?
Every time I mention Doritos, is that what happens? Maybe.
There was a comedian, I forget who it was. I'll have to see if I can find the clip where they were like, now, of course, disclaimer, oh my gosh, like, we're going to get deplatformed if I say this, but basically the comedian was joking, didn't actually do this, wasn't advocating it, but saying that he wished that as a kid, like as they were driving by McDonald's, his parents would have just like punched him in the face
Well,
and
that's
just,
from the that's Morgan whatever, Morgan from the guy who did the documentary on eating McDonald's for like a couple of months.
oh, was it Super Size Me?
Yeah,
Morgan
Super Size
Spurlock?
Me. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe that's what it was from.
Either he took that from this person, this comedian, or he said this in the movie, and then this comedian may have said it. But anyways, that's the humor that I always think about inside. I use that one all the time.
Yeah, so we're
That's
not,
impact.
yeah, that's impact. So we're talking about like affecting the outcome of how people behave, but then there's also this double meaning that to the word that's somewhat related about like having an impact through impact. So
Yeah, well,
anyway,
it's also I also think about the like a punch in the face. We want to use that as a very simple example, but there's multiple scales of the intensity and effectiveness of the punch in the face, right? So punch in the face to someone who's been punched in the face 1,000 times, and they do it all the time, as part of their job as a fighter. Well, what's the actual impact? As opposed to someone who's brand new, who doesn't know how to give a punch and just whacks someone and like knocks their teeth out. What's the impact of that one? You know, so you can see there's someone who's you know giving the intention and doing the action and the force. But we also want to discuss, even in the context we'll talk about it today for any aspect connected to fitness, there's intensity inside of it that has to be measured somewhat, and we do really want to talk about the consequences and the effect on the other side, right? Like, well, was it really a punch? Yeah, sure, it looked like a punch, but yeah, etc. So I thought about that too, right? I was like, yeah, that's a very easy definition of impact, in, let's call it, a physical sense, right? Um, but it does carry over to what we're going to discuss. It's helpful.
yeah, and it also has something to do with, the notion of reality hitting you. Do you know what I mean? Like you being forced to
Yeah,
confront reality. It's that
right.
Mike Tyson quote, everyone's got a plan till they get hit in the face.
Yes, yes.
Um, and not to go down this rabbit hole, but just it made me think of it. It's happened in the past couple days. There's been a lot of discussion around how QAnon has essentially had to come to grips with the fact that their prophecy of what was supposed to happen, Wednesday at noon did not come to pass. And just the, I guess, the sociology and psychology of like, what do you do when like reality hits?
Yeah,
What do you do
yeah,
when there's that impact?
yeah.
And there's some people who are like, well, it was for all for naught. We got duped. And then there are others who are, trying to come up with other stories. But just, I bring that up again, not to go down that rabbit hole, but just to say,
Yeah.
like, what does one do when one's worldview
Yes.
impacts with reality?
Mm.
And, you can either change your worldview to reflect reality, or, it just is an interesting notion of how do you relate to reality once it's made an impact, I guess.
Yeah, and I also think about the QAnon observers relative to you and me, is that they may not see it as a punch in the face. They may see it as another opportunity of a oppressive voice, or some kind of
Right.
mishandling of information or something. So I guess it still depends, I think. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and they were discussing that, like how there's 50% who are like kind of seeing the writing on the wall, and then there's 50% who are like, well, you can always reinterpret the tea leaves.
Yes.
Doesn't matter what data you get from the world, I can always read that in light of um, different things. That's what Karl Popper, the famous philosopher of science, once said about the notion of falsifiability in relation to like Marxism and Freudian psychology. He said, when you can interpret any single bit of evidence in light of your theory,
Hmm.
then the theory just kind of goes poof, because there's no criteria of falsifiability. You're just
Yes.
reinterpreting the tea leaves.
Right. Right. Yeah. I like that.
So,
I like that.
so anyway, just an interesting connection there between, what we're mainly going to be talking today isn't the philosophy of what we're mainly going to be talking about today isn't the philosophy of punches. It's going to be, the philosophy of like, how do we make an impact upon the world? But just an interesting connection there of how, that notion of striking or confronting reality, or having a, direct head-on collision with reality can be useful in that regard.
Yeah, and I think we may just to add to your language, we may not be trying to solve the big solution as to how we make an impact, or maybe we will. But I want to really just help people organize their thoughts around what impact means,
Yeah, exactly.
um, and then we can we can just allow time to decide upon if there was impact. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think that's really one of the main big important questions we'll be trying to answer today, which is what is it consist in? What's
Yeah.
the time frame? Who's being affected? All these different things.
Yeah.
So, getting to the philosophical considerations with regard to impact, we've talked about utilitarianism and consequentialism in previous episodes, but this seems probably like one of the most relevant episodes to discuss it because this is um, the a lot of that moral philosophy is tied up in the notion of impact. So if anyone out there listening has ever seen the NBC show The Good Place with Kristen Bell and Ted Danson, which is the closest anyone's ever come to having a sitcom based on philosophy, or if they've ever heard of the Trolley Problem, all of these things are related to this notion of utilitarianism. So consequentialism and utilitarianism are both moral theories, and sometimes they get confused, but um, consequentialism is the broader term, and utilitarianism is a type of consequentialism. So consequentialism basically says that we should judge the worth of a moral action primarily based on the consequences it brings about. Now, we need to contrast this with other moral theories that base morality on intentions, like Kantian moral philosophy, or the agent, or certain virtues like Aristotelian moral philosophy. And certain moral philosophies try to combine all of those and get some bit of the consequence and the intention. But consequentialism basically says the relevant moral detail is what was the consequence that was brought about. Now, a silly example here to kind of illustrate this is, something is good to the extent James receives $100 as a result of, this particular action. That's a moral theory right there. That could be a consequentialist moral theory. You could have any consequence there, and then we would need to discuss, like, well, is that the right consequence, and things like that. So I'll pause there for a second. Any thoughts or questions with that?
Yeah, no, I just wrote down there that your last point on we will need to discuss if that would be the right way or the right way of going about it,
Right.
because we do want to eventually get there, but you've laid it out perfectly so that people just know the definition. I wrote down also maybe a word that can come back up, and you can correct me if I'm wrong if people can interject it. We're looking at outcomes, and looking through that lens of what will the outcomes be for self, for the whole, for the context of what you're discussing, um, and then the judgment of outcomes, and that's something yeah, it may flow in and out of our in a discussion of that. And to back up how we're eventually going to get to that, but I want people to hold on to that. It's the common platitudes that are really in fitness that are sold, including in our language in some way, shape, or form, where we say you want to go out there and you want to make an impact. This is where it comes from. Or you want to make an impact on fitness, or you want to have some kind of impact in your life, or yeah, you should impact people, like, yeah. So this is where it comes from as to why we want to discuss that, not because we think it's all worth not, is we actually just do want to measure what you're actually discussing, because there's far more conversation around it just being a virtue signal today that you're making impact. And I want people to think really hard about the definition of it.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm really glad you mentioned that because something I used to discuss when I was teaching philosophy, but I didn't put in the outline. But I'm glad we're coming back to it based on what you said. One of So there are many objections and problems with utilitarianism and consequentialism, which we'll get to. But one of the virtues of consequentialism or utilitarianism is exactly what you said, like the outcomes. You can see it.
Mhm.
A big objection to any moral theory based on intention is you can't see an intention.
Hmm.
You can't see a virtue. And people will always say, well, I didn't have bad intentions. Well, I had the best of intentions in doing this. But with a consequentialist moral theory, did more people get fed? Did, more money go to Oxfam? Do you know what I mean? Like, there
Hmm.
really is this on the ground, empirical, we can measure it, result that we are referencing, upon which we can actually base the morality of something. And I guess another connection, just based on what you're saying with fitness, that is something we do in fitness. It's like,
Yeah.
where does the rubber meet the road? How do we measure this?
Yeah. And we don't wait for 18 years before we measure it. We have like every couple of weeks, there's like guardrails and measurement techniques that we use to see that we're moving towards those outcomes.
Right.
So that's yeah, that's
So
great.
for all its problems and objections, which we'll eventually discuss, that is a gigantic plus of the theory, is the fact that you have this concrete measurement that you can reference.
Yeah. Will we also have opportunity? I just thought about it, the lane of um, measurement and towards something that's impactful as to how you're defining it, but maybe you have the wrong intentions. Are we then back to dissolving that to say, well, first we got to land with what good intentions are first, and then go. You know what I
Well,
mean?
I
Like,
mean,
because people could be measuring things for years and years, and they're like, oh, money in the bank, and that they define that as their way of impact.
yes. I mean, I think a consequentialist has very good grounds for making arguments with regard to what is ultimately going to be the thing that is worth measuring and what counts. But they're going to have a tough time with talking about the intentions behind something. It will still be with reference to outcomes. And this is one of the main potential objections to the theory, which is that, the ends justify the means, or, your intentions could be nefarious, but as long as you brought about a good thing, um, that we agree is a good thing,
Yeah.
it was good. And that is where intentions butt up against this view.
Okay, good. I just wanted to lay it out there because it's the classic the heat that I always get back is like, James, why prohibit people from moving? Like, why are you hating on these concepts and ideas? People are exercising, man. Just relax. Like, they're all getting together and dancing under lights and loud music. So it's that's where it goes, right? It's like, just hold your horses there. Where the outcomes are, we're having people are moving more, right? You
Right.
see, it's like, well, what's the and right next to that, obviously, is like, oh, we're making an impact on health, and we're decreasing the obesity issue.
Right.
Um, so
So I think there are a number of ways to respond to that, but two relevant to what you were just saying. One is as a consequentialist, where you could say, no, we're just measuring the wrong thing. That's just the wrong outcome. We're not looking for that in particular.
mhm.
The hard thing for a consequentialist to do, which we've discussed in the past, is, well, that's the wrong intentions behind what you're doing. I don't care if they're moving in this particular way. What I care about are the intentions aligned with the particular actions that are being pursued. And that's much harder for a consequentialist
Yeah,
to um, give an account of.
the struggle is real there then.
Yeah. So, so that's consequentialism. Now, utilitarianism is by far the most famous type of consequentialism. It's by far the most famous moral theory within consequentialism. So, this was developed by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, mainly in 19th century England. And it says roughly that an action is good to the extent that it maximizes utility, and bad to the extent that it interferes with or minimizes utility. Now, the immediate question is, what's utility? Typically, how it gets defined is maximizing the greatest good or the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. So typically, the principle of utility is stated in the following way: an action is praiseworthy if it increases happiness, and is blameworthy if it decreases happiness. Um, how do we increase happiness? Typically, the utilitarian is going to refer to pleasure. They're going to say happiness is the increase in pleasure. And Jeremy Bentham famously has all these different measures of pleasure, like its intensity, its duration, its certainty, its remoteness, its fecundity, all these different things. And a famous example that's used within utilitarianism, or that's helpful in illustrating it, is the trolley problem, right? So you have a train careening down a track. On one side of the tracks is one person, and the other side is 4 people or 10 people or however many people you want to make it, but it's more than one. And you are at the lever. You have the opportunity to pull the lever. What is the morally right thing to do? Well, according to utilitarian, it is to pull the lever in the direction of the one person to save 10 or 4 or whatever it's going to be. The idea being that you have maximized the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people.
Hmm.
So,
And I always Peter Singer was the first one introduced the trolley problem to me, or maybe listening to I forget who it was that mentioned that in the same conversation, but I thought it was interesting. Maybe you can explain a little bit more why they would use something as intensive as a life or lives in the consequences of the choices you make. Why would they choose that as opposed to, it wasn't there another storyline they could use to make it like a little bit more, a little bit less intensive as opposed to human life? Or why did they use human life for that?
um, that's a good question. I mean, I think I think part of it has it to do with just the visceral impact. I mean, you could do it with regard to, Robin Hood, steal from the rich to give to the poor. You could do it
Right,
that way too.
right.
Um, but Peter Singer is a famous modern day utilitarian. He's got a similar thing where he's got a foundation called the Life You Can Save, which is actually trying to do really good things in the world. But he's got a philosophical argument that basically says, look, why would you buy $100 pair of shoes when that could go to save 100 people from famine or something like that? So I think they use, whether it's the trolley problem or Peter Singer in that particular example, I think they use the notion of saving a life to get that visceral kind of like, oh, I need to,
Hmm.
do this. And sometimes it hides certain problems with argumentation.
Yeah, yeah,
Like the trolley problem has a lot of problems with it. Singer's uh, argument, although for an ostensibly good thing, has problems with it. So I think that's part of the reason. So
yeah. Or okay, or you were to put someone like who has the DNA, makeup of Jesus Christ in their compassion, that's well known and on their T-shirt as the one person, and then you just have 10 humans. That changes up the piece too. Of course, that's pre-reading, of course, prior to the trolley issue, but that creates an issue with it also.
yeah, or like, what if it's your mother in the burning building? You know what I mean? Like there's all sorts of, or what
Yeah,
if you don't, what about your integrity? You know what I mean? What about dignity? What about you not wanting to take a life? So I mean, there's all sorts of problems with um, the trolley problem and with that mode of thinking. If anyone ever saw Avengers, Thanos, spoiler alert, is out there to kill half of the universe to
yeah,
save the other half. It's like, well, okay. Uh, that's an extreme problematic type of utilitarianism, but that is very much in the mold of that notion.
yes,
So like take whatever moral means we need to bring about the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So
yeah, yeah. Yeah, good challenge. I was thinking about when you said the definition being under 3 words: action that maximizes utility. And then I quickly reverted to just doing checks and balances on my language around the action that we have in place for our language in OPEX that tries to raise the coach value, the client's autonomy, and the business capital reinvestment opportunities. So when we say winning, we define it as winning for everyone involved, i.e., our definition of utility is something worthwhile doing because the coach can become a pro, the client can become physically sovereign in knowledge around that, and the business can stand on its own 2 legs regardless of the storms that come through it. And we could bump that up against a number of other options. I would make the argument that the owner is the only one that wins in my definition and how I defined it for the other models. So the owner increases money, the business increases brand awareness, but there's a big, strong argument of, you know, the winning of that project in comparison to ours, right? And so that's what I thought about immediately for that definition and where it sits for fitness.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great example. I mean, another related one in the business realm is, there's been for the past 40 years, 40, 50 years, um, the notion that a business's purpose is to maximize profit for its shareholders. That's coming under increasing scrutiny.
Mhm.
Um, not saying that it's wrong for a business to make a profit, but is that the sole and only
Mm.
good? And what if that comes at the expense of, let's take the fitness example, like you said, what if that comes at the expense of, take a big box gym, a client,
Yeah,
getting their fitness, or a
yeah,
coach, having the proper knowledge and being able to live a livable life, and things like that. So yeah, I think that's a very relevant consideration.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Or the questioning of just because it's apropos for the time, the all the positive, signaling around the open participation again to increase, movement in the affiliates again.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a right or wrong. It's just a, you know, uh, where's the utility in that for what the language used to be of the larger goal, right? It's something to question.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. So one major objection that comes up here when we, so if we're saying utilitarianism is trying to maximize utility, utility is maximizing the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, we're saying that happiness is coextensive with pleasure. Well, that just sounds like hedonism, right? So a famous objection to utilitarianism is just, well, why is it not just, sex and food and cars and all the rest of that stuff? So John Stuart Mill probably,
Why you gotta throw cars in there every time?
that's a good question. Why do I throw cars in there? Flossing?
Offline, we'll heal that one.
I'm trying like a hip hop video. That's basically what I'm thinking
Okay,
of.
got it. It's not like Chariot. You don't have Chariot envy.
No, no. I mean, maybe. I mean, I drive a Prius, so perhaps.
Hey,
Um,
mine's just a prettier version of a Prius. No one wants to say it. Mine's just a faster version.
but it is very pretty. Yes,
Yeah,
it is very pretty.
right.
So John Stuart Mill is probably the most famous utilitarian, and he's really the one who kind of took the torch from Bentham, and really tried to flesh out the view and answer objections. And one of the most one of his most famous contributions to the notion of utilitarianism was trying to distinguish between different types of pleasures,
Mm.
to make it so that it's not, utilitarianism is not just hedonism. So, for example, Mill would say something to the effect of, the acquisition of knowledge is fundamentally different in kind as a pleasure compared to scratching an itch. No amount of scratching an itch could equal the pleasure from gaining knowledge. And a famous Mill quote that illustrates this is, it's better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. The idea there being that, it's cool for a pig to just have, basic pleasures and, go to the bathroom and eat and things like that. But even if Socrates is dissatisfied, what Socrates is engaging in is a higher order thing than just base pleasures.
Yeah,
Um,
I wrote down the smirk of knowing. That's how I recognize it, as like when people know there's a deep hidden pleasure of that little smirk you see in someone's face, right?
right.
Um, yeah, I of course that I'm just trying to be careful here of individuals, or just thinking about individuals that possibly don't see pleasure in that. I mean, it kind of just, to me, it makes sense that as humans we would want to get something, that could build us inside of us, that we're like, oh, there's enjoyment in learning, and there's enjoyment in knowing, and there's enjoyment in I guess the language that can be moved next to that would be awareness, right? If you're knowing, you're becoming more aware of things. And I'm not pulling in consciousness or those other meanings, but I could see that as being defined in there, of knowledge being something that could be a really quote unquote positive, admirable pleasure.
Yeah, and it need not, I mean, I think knowledge is a good one, but to address your point, about what if someone doesn't like knowledge, it need not be knowledge necessarily from Mill. I think the main idea is just that we can make some distinction between base and higher pleasure. So whether that's love or purpose or meaning, with stuffing your face with fast food, that's a pleasure, but it's not quite the same as making like a home cooked meal for your family. The idea being that there's something more sustainable, fulfilling, less draining, less addictive, than than uh, than the other thing, I guess, is the basic headline there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That explains a little bit more. I'm just going to go back and say I also want to, recognize the people and where they were in the time that they came up with these ideas too, because culture is either upstream or downstream based upon how they're perceiving those virtuous concepts, right, for pleasure. So, I think for today, and I always go right to my home to kind of consider these things, right, and my home is a great example for me to always keep learning around the dyadic things that happen between the masculine and the feminine, and the continuum of that. And so I think of it on that broad continuum. That's why I say, knowing is, whether you like it or not, especially for our language of what we talk in science and fitness, is really connected to learning, which is connected to seeking, which is connected to process orientation, etc. And that's a very masculine lane for people to find pleasure in, right? But when it's not in that lane, not to demarcate it, but to say it's not always like that. There's a lot around unknowing and disconnection, and um, and pleasure in something that's not like that, you know. And it's an ongoing thing that's very pleasurable to not know. It's like the just process, or it's process disorientation. It's like, anyways, I'm trying to describe it very loosely so we don't attach to one thing being better than the other, but just to say my eyes are open to not everyone finding as deep a pleasure in knowing as what I do.
Yeah, no, completely agreed. And yeah, there's obviously a dark side to knowing too, where sometimes you're just like, oh my God, why did I do that? Why did I go down that rabbit hole? Like,
Yes,
let's
yes,
go in
that's
another
another good
direction.
point.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, that's
I
another good
totally
one.
agree with
Yeah,
that. Socrates had that line, the unexamined life isn't worth living. And Alistair McIntyre, one of my professors over at Notre Dame, would famously say, neither is the examined one. So
yeah,
it's always that push and pull between those two, right?
yeah. And then in psychology, there is forget who mentioned it. I have to come up with a name, but a wandering mind is a scary mind.
Yeah,
Like a one that So it all depends upon where the language is coming from,
yeah,
and who
absolutely.
mentions that and how they're own. Yeah. So, anyways, that was great. I love. I think that just uh, pulled out right there something we need to discuss down the road, though. I think is an excerpt of hedonism, if, in regards to fitness. Maybe I think we're going to get there in aesthetics, possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sensationalism and objectification and projection and things like that.
Yeah, no, I think that would be an interesting one. I mean, and the association with hedonism back in Mill and Bentham's time, and still today, I would say is not a good one. So when you accuse something of being hedonism at base, like usually people will try and save it in some way. So I think the connection with fitness would be a interesting one, and to what extent do our desires ultimately in fitness, or some of our desires and the way they're manifested, at least today on Instagram and other things, relate to or connect with hedonism.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and to back up for pleasure, people may have heard me discuss that. So I'm just saying what I've said numerous times based upon variations in intention. So the athlete's intention versus the human's intention, if we remember that. And I had pleasure inside of the athlete's intentions. And it's not for today to discuss, but maybe we can pull that into that hedonistic conversation of the 4 Ps, right? Athletes go after pleasure, pain, points, and prizes. And
Right.
that's completely different than the intentions based upon this journey and this process of um, of the physical expression with fitness for general health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, as we'll discuss today, it all comes down to like, what do we mean by pleasure,
Yes.
right? It can mean various different things.
Yes.
There's one sense that's, a base level. There's the discussion that Mill's making around like higher order versus lower order. Um, when Aristotle talked about eudaimonia and happiness, that wasn't just like, you know, plunking your butt in front of the TV and like having Netflix on infinite scroll with whatever food you wanted. Like
Yeah.
it was meaning, morality. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's really, when we talk about pleasure, we got to ultimately unpack like what does that mean?
For sure. Yeah. I think about dopamine and serotonin as well inside of that on a physiological level, right?
Yeah. And I think, long before anyone knew about neurotransmitters and dopamine and serotonin and all the rest of that stuff, I do think Aristotle and others tapped into something that they could just see with their own eyes, which is that we know now more on a neurotransmitter level, like the dopamine push, like it'll push you and then it'll push you over a cliff. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like things that are more the base pleasures, like sex or money or food. Yeah, you get pleasure from it, and it's good in a certain amount, but like it will drive you off the edge of a cliff if you
Mhm.
let it. Whereas things that are the higher pleasures, whether it be music or knowledge or meaning or love, or you know what I mean, they're more sustaining, fulfilling, longer lasting, and they're not um you're not going to end up in a you know in a ditch over music. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Maybe that's not the right example, but you get what I'm
Yeah.
saying. It's more fulfilling.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. There's less opportunity to get into an addictive state.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. It's not that it doesn't happen because
Yeah,
some people go crazy trying to know things or get crazy with music and
yeah.
pile on things that get them to what they believe is a levitation version of that. But I get your point. Yeah. Yep.
So one might ask, why are we discussing utilitarianism and consequentialism with regard to impact? Again, because these are the moral and political theories that are most commonly associated with the notion of impact. Again, Peter Singer is a famous utilitarian. He's got books about, you know, uh, global charities and donating to Oxfam. And he's got a whole slew of stuff in that same mold on veganism and vegetarianism using utilitarian arguments. But it really is related to this notion of what is the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So there are a number of famous questions and objections to utilitarianism that I thought would help us, discuss some of these important questions within fitness. So one question that we've already hinted at that I thought, James, you and I could try and tackle is, are all pleasures equal in value when it comes to impact? So the fitness example would be, let's use the CrossFit Open. If 10,000 people get that, awesome or cool feeling after doing, WOD 21.1, that last 10 minutes, is that as worthwhile as one person gaining long-term fitness autonomy?
Hmm.
Right. So that's really, and that's an objection in philosophy that people actually have to Mill. They're saying, no, you're trying to have it both ways. You're trying to say scratching an itch isn't the same as like love or knowledge, but no, you can't do that. You can't say something is intrinsically good. Like if your theory is based around like we're adding up the pleasures, like you got to bite the bullet and just deal with it. So it's an interesting question when we're talking about impact today. What do we mean? Is it just that transitory feeling after a workout, or is it like, does one person getting long-term fitness autonomy outweigh all of that? You couldn't even put the two on the same scale. So I don't know if you had any thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. Immediately, I think it goes back to something we discussed before. Is there has to be a time based upon the context what we're talking about. So, for a number of people doing intense activity, and then someone just doing something in the corner, and I'll just use those two stark, options. Um, for that particular time, there's strong argument for both, for that particular time. So I think when you just added in the word of autonomy speaks of this sequence of time. And so now that has to be added into it. So the current action that people are going to partake in, I guess we got to figure out how to language it so that it bleeds outside of this call, and then coaches can talk about it so that they can start saying, when I say that this is the right way, you know, and when I define impact as this, I'm using this time sequence, because otherwise you'll get drowned out in saying, you know, well, how are you defining the good for all when you see all that happening, right? All these hordes of people moving towards Orange Theory and coming out and happy and wearing their Lululemon and it's like, hey, look, hey, you know, it's like, geez, that's there's something, a lot of positive in that. Yeah, but what are we measuring? The acute variable of the happiness and the pleasure right after? Or are we measuring 8 years down the road and their, you know, definition of fitness? And this is where I think the roads diverge. So I'm not sure if that creates more confusion, or is there a way of going about helping that language?
Yeah, no, I mean that brings us to another point, which is probably one of the most important ones within utilitarianism, and I think it's exactly the right place to go. What's the time horizon of impact? And this is
Mm-hmm.
a famous problem for utilitarianism, and it will be a important question for us to ask. You know, are we talking a year, a month, a decade, a century, a millennium? Like, what's the time horizon? And you know, if we want to get really honest about the time horizon of things, like in the ultimate end game, like, you know, the universe isn't around anymore, we'll see if humans are, you know what I mean, like we have to be considerate of that fact that, like, what are we talking, like the end state of the universe? Are we talking 100 years from now? Like, um so those considerations um do matter. And then it brings up another issue for utilitarianism is, you know, can in seemingly immoral action now come to be moral later on as a result of the impact of
Yes.
what happens 100 years hence?
Oh yeah, that's the classic one. You know, it's not connected to what I said earlier. People are like, James, why are you hating at people moving? It's like they really do believe that the purveyors of this information are telling the hordes of people to do all this shit. They're like, listen, I get it, bro, but over time they'll become aware, and right, so they're just they're just hoping that, to your point, we know it's classically immoral right now, but hey, over time they'll wake up, right? That's the argument that's used as well. And now we go back to like, well, what's your measurement to determine what your definition is of success for that? And this is where we break, right? Because and then it goes, anyways. Gosh, I don't know why I get exhausted by thinking about that, but you just can't get someone straight on that. Like, well, what are you measuring, and what's the definition of it, and et cetera. That's why I said earlier, it goes back to intentions based upon it. But I wrote down for the where I see it causing a fray, or it may just be one particular incident, is that, as you know, Robbie, it's so hard to connect to the future, and it's so hard to connect people to a time consequence, because it's far more, exciting actually to get an acute response. And that acute response is far more exciting than the less intense response, right? That could be connected to something that's more worthwhile down the road. So this is what I'm saying is, like, there's very few that are willing to talk, because it's embarrassing, of the being down the road 12 years and saying, listen, I know you're just getting started, and I'd highly suggest against this pathway. I'd highly suggest against it. And so the observer who's starting that is weighing this like acute aha moment of the post-workout intense workout with this old fucker with a knee problem saying, I'm just letting you know what you need to define living. It's like, how do you, so that's a really tough thing to battle, is the time pulled into that, you know, pull into it, because that acute feeling is very powerful. It's very powerful.
Yeah, in a lot of ways we're biologically wired to, you know, go for what is immediately right in front of our face, as opposed to what is going to be more longer term. I mean, it's taken generations and generations and generations for us to have like rule of law and worry about the consequences of carbon dioxide for the globe. You know what I mean? Like all these different things that, when you're a hunter gatherer, presumably these are not, I mean, of course, at that point, industry and society aren't, issues either, but you see what I'm saying? Biologically speaking, like our hard wiring is to go for, the quicker, easier, right in front of us thing rather than the longer term thing. And it's only through like generations and generations of reflecting on like, oh, it turns out if we invest money now, or if we withhold pleasure now, we can receive greater pleasure later down the line.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes me think about the almost impossible opportunity is for people to brain stretch and get them disconnected to read up on a lifetime, to read up on a life. Just think about that, like for every 10, 11, 12 up to 25-year-old today to just step back and disconnect and actually get the opportunity to read about things like that. You know what I'm saying? Like it's almost impossible. I'm not sounding nihilistic on it, but it's almost impossible. Whereas, with 600 years ago, you may have just looked around your tribe or your tent or your home and be like, this is a nuclear family. There's the elders. This is what a life looks like. You just, it's like observation based upon that, right? And there may not be an opportunity right now for individuals to get anything other, to your point, that I would agree that humans want to, I guess a way I've heard a number of people talk about, we want to make things easier. Like it's in our shit to make things easier. But what leans into that is where we get the issue, Robbie. Maybe you can help me on that. Is that, to your point you said earlier of the hedonism that can push you over the edge, but then there's these other things like you used music and art and et cetera that won't push you over the edge. Fitness is bumped right inside of those. So people are like, oh, but this is such a healthy, virtuous thing to partake in, right? Again, it's like, who are you to say I should be considering 12 years down the road as if this is futile, right? Who are you to say that? Like, come on, this is music. That's basically what they're saying. This is art. This is not hedonism. And so this is where it looks like a gray area, but it's black and white in my opinion. It's black and white. And again, that's why I'm kind of stuck. It goes back to the competency and the cognitive ability on behalf of the observer as well as their intentions, because they got to be able to have the competencies to, like, have someone who's 12 years down the road say, just think about this. And this is how you measure the ongoing process to ensure you're going in the right direction, yeah. So I don't know if there's anything in that or nothing. That's okay.
No, I think there is. I mean, I made it seem earlier as if there were these two buckets, and maybe there are three, or maybe there are multiple buckets where, saying, okay, well, there's base pleasures over here that can lead you off the edge of a cliff, and then there's higher pleasures. But, it's certainly possible that there are these things in between that can kind of straddle the fence, and maybe fitness is one of those where it does have some higher order aspects to it, but it also has some aspects of the base pleasures where people can drive themselves over a cliff with it, in terms of the dopamine response that they get from a workout, or the Instagram likes that they get from posting a muscle up or their six pack, or whatever it is. So I see what you're saying there about how it can kind of, people today at least are like, oh no, just as long as you get moving, like we're all fat, like as long as you are doing something, like just go do it, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And I see that, and I understand the reasoning behind it, but to your point that you've made a number of times, that can lead down a not good path.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's more than just getting to the gym. It's about consistency. Something that I've used, numerous times on this call is that metaphorical hypothesis of discussing with a client to get them. So to back my point, if competency is the issue, then you got to have dialogue and conversation, right? And if you don't have the system set up for dialogue and conversation, then fucking good luck, right? But you got to have a conversation, dialogue, and then what's one thing that you can use as an idea, right? As an analogy is to go through what I get coaches to go through with clients is the what's under the language that's possibly injected on what they're saying they want to do in fitness. So they start saying, "Oh, I want to be healthy and live long and prosper." Okay, well, let's clarify what you mean by that. And then it's like, "Oh, so you want to exercise forever, right?" It's like, "Yeah, I want to play with my grandkids and hike when I'm older, and I just want to look like that guy in the T-Mag commercial with the." It's like, okay, so what do you think takes to get there, right? What do you think takes to get there? This and these things, and then what they get to and what they say themselves is consistency. They say it in their own language. I need to be doing this 4 times a week. I need to be here at this time, and this needs to go on for every year hereafter, regardless of what the medium looks like. Here across the South Bend, online, wherever. It's like it's got to go on, and then the client goes, God damn it, that's a lot of hits. That's a lot of iterations. So what I just did there was offer the client to come up with a way of determining what the consequences will be in the path that they're choosing for what they just said they're coming in here with, right? I want to live long and prosper. You need to clarify that, because I really think that's injected and you don't know what that means. And let's get to the. So that's just one way. And I would rather choose that as opposed to the other side, which is not the only other side, but the other side of like, let's just get going, and this is a journey, so we'll figure out as we go along. We just keep pushing towards improvements, because that's a really easy way to bump up against pleasure and acute, um, cortisol chasing.
Yeah, and to your point that we've mentioned on other episodes like the Science of Fitness podcast and others, when we're talking about this time horizon of impact, um, if we make the time horizon for the client like their life, that's going to lead to a very different notion of impact than just, immediately post workout, do we take their blood biomarkers? Like you've talked about with high intensity interval training. It's like, yes, if you look at the impact, like right then and there, shortly thereafter, that week, or what have you, and we're defining that as like impact. Okay, well, oh, this biomarker improved and that biomarker improved. Well, that's one notion of impact. But if we're talking on the time horizon of an entire human life, that's going to lead to a very different notion of impact.
Yeah. And then it pulls in the conversation for others who wish to go there. You can spend some time on it yourself around potential, around, giving up all your resources when you have them available, around, defining what would be considered what I call maximum physical potential for a lifetime, as opposed to, really great pleasure for 7 years. And then hanging on for dear life for the rest of the 40 years. Like you want to go there in your brain and think about that, and lay those principles on top of it for what I call, growing and peaking and resisting entropy, and what is a lifetime of exercise and that participation. And then you can start to draw, some ideas on a theory, let's say, on the utility inside of your exercise practice, and the consequences of you being consistent versus the consequences of you rushing for that dopamine hit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Easier said than done.
Right.
I'm not sure if you wanted to take a second to think about that one. Is how important is it for uh, the client that we're trying to communicate this to in their education and their competency? Because remember, they come in with multiple stories around, not understanding the long game in our language of the consequences around their current fitness. So are we just back to square one on remedying that through conversations on intentions?
I mean, I think that's a very powerful way to do it. I mean, this does get to a question that I was wondering about in typing this all up, that I'm sure you've thought about. It's like there are different notions of impact in relation to what we're talking about. What is the impact we want fitness to have on the client? What's the impact the coach is to have on the client? What's the impact fitness has on the collective?
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. But specifically with regard to the question of, what impact can and should we have as coaches upon the client? um, yeah, I think it has to it has to come down to conversations. I mean, it's going to be a very similar thing to going to a financial advisor. Do you know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah.
not exactly, of course, and there
Yeah.
are other virtues inside of fitness that extend far beyond anything that could be discussed in finances, but the same type way where you're having these discussions about, hey, you're spending, $500 a month on eating out. And like, if you want to sustain your finances, like for the rest of your life, that's not going to go too well.
Yeah.
Well, uh, metaphorically speaking, that's what's happening with the fitness side. Although interestingly, just as I mentioned that, like you can't quite point to that in the same way you can in the financial advisor case, right?
Yeah.
Like they can't see it until it happens and it's too late.
Yeah.
You can't point to the $500 a month unless it's like, their knee is injured or, they can't sleep at night or something like that. But usually it's too late by the time they've recognized it.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's where probably within finance, but probably not so much. Well, I don't know. I'm just using another industry, but within fitness, um, it's I just see it as a daunting task, to get people to recognize the consequences of the short fast model, right? Because there's just so much power in it that I just can't, like especially to your point of saying, we do need to clarify. Are we talking about, coaches having impact on the client? And I'd say yes. That's where I'd like to, how do coaches have impact on the client? What do we mean by that impact? How much, Robbie, does that coach have to come in with, like, an oath, or operating procedures or mantras, that are tried and true? I think you and I would both agree. It's like, oh yeah, it's great to have, but where is the proof, like there is in finance, or like there is for coaches to fall back on and be like, listen, we've tried this thing, because I talk about it, right? But listen, not everyone has had 25 years of exercise experience plus coaching for a period of time where they could say, I can see the forest floor beneath the trees. So, um, yeah, I'm just mentioning how much of a daunting task that is to create explanations. But I guess that should be the inspiration, is to get coaches to, get excited about the fact of trying to get to that explanation of the utility inside of their exercise intentions.
Yeah, and I mean, it's doubly daunting. It's daunting on the side of the coach to explain these things, and then it's daunting on this in the sense of, like we were discussing earlier, naturally people have a propensity to want to take the shortest route, to take the easiest route, to um, to want to get things done quicker. So it's hard to navigate around that. It's possible in certain instances, but it's difficult.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm. Well, I also have to just taking down a reminder there for me to come up with a number of different stories, a number of different metaphorical hypotheses that'll raise people, not just the consistency story, right? Maybe pull out another virtue and try to wrap some kind of storyline of understanding around that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I've thought of that I thought could be a whole episode in and of itself that I have always thought was kind of an interesting thing is, people, especially in our health and fitness realm, always talk about how we live today is fundamentally unnatural, right? I mean, so many things, not living in small groups and, having blue light exposure at night and, eating the way we do and not exercising. But unless we're positing some supernatural force that brought this all about, which I'm certainly not, and I don't imagine you are as well, like this is all the end result of natural processes,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like human biology led us to this point to
Mm-hmm.
make things uh, as easy as possible. Like this is what a hunter gatherer would do eventually. Like if they had the means,
Yeah.
they would make things easier. They
Yeah.
would not walk as much. They would, eat things that are delicious.
Yeah.
So it's this really tough tension between like this is the end result of what naturally we want,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then but also realizing that that's ultimately like long term destroying us.
Yeah.
And
And
like how do we battle those natural instincts?
yeah. Yeah, well, we need the zombie. We
The
need to
zombie
have the zombie
apocalypse.
apocalypse.
Give us the signal, zombies.
We gotta get something, like something right now on this call. Well, that's a plane. We need something because yeah, it's really challenging to propose a mediocre medium concept of this slow, physical expression, or this slow drip physical expression, right? And then try to wrap all these other things around it. I think something that I've been, thinking about more so also is that, having this moderate approach to exercise that has utility can also possibly allow us to get on with really really more important things in our life. I think that some of the stuff that goes inside of the race for adaptation and speed of adaptation and fast tracking is to actually numb things, so it pulls you away from this wide-eyed option to see other things, to learn about politics, to read books about evolution versus creation, right? To learn concepts of purpose and meaning, to learn about concepts of hope and faith. There's so I've been thinking more along those lines, Robbie, as like, well, it may be very hard to challenge that idea for individuals, but you may want to have your exercise program have really high utility as a base support so you can do it forever, but such that it leads you to the opportunity to do all these other things, to your to back to your point of like, it is unnatural to participate willfully in physical expression, right? It's very unnatural. We don't need to do it, right? But what can we get from it if we do participate in a version of it? You know, and this is where the good hard question is, and that's why I use words like folly and diversion, tact and diversion, because it actually is that. But I want to be okay with that. I want to be okay with it, such that we could, get on with really, cool things. And we understand why people choose athleticism. We understand why people will want to get on stage naked, as 43 years of age with 3 kids, right? I get it. That makes sense. It's something that's admirable around pushing the physicality and the physical expression, albeit in a short period of time, because why else? Like, what else are you doing? You're probably doing something else that's more hedonistic, Doritos and football on Sunday, as example. And there's a balance for that, obviously, but um, yeah. So I think it's just a repeat of a good hard question. Yeah, yeah. And through all that, I don't think I'm getting closer to a really good answer on how you do, you know, generally create that definition of impact, and that's okay. I think that's okay.
Well, I mean, I think maybe one way to narrow it down and see if we can get a little bit. I mean, like you were saying, we don't necessarily need to get a concrete answer to what's the best way to bring about an impact today, but just talk about like what kind of impact we want to bring about, or what would be impact. Is questions about you know who or what does the impacting, who or what is impacted. Um, so if we're talking about who's impacted, I guess, one question we could ask to help us narrow things down is, are we talking about the impact of fitness on society at large? Are we talking about the impact of fitness on the client? Are we talking about the impact of fitness on the coach, the fitness collective? Like, what, when
Well,
you think about,
let's start with society. Let's go through all of them
okay,
briefly. Yeah, yeah. So if we're talking about the impact of fitness on society, the first thing I go to is being aware of the current time in how people know and learn and observe and find out information on the particular topic. And when it comes to information, the real social idea, um, I'll lay it out briefly, and we can get to figuring out how do you create impact based upon what the current consensus is. Fitness, in large generalization, is used as a fix, and that's a fix for a a lifestyle that's not conducive to what we're describing as real high potential, right? So that's the current consensus. There's a very, very small percentage, marginal group, that truly does believe there's these deeper positive things inside of fitness, intention, and the freedom of it, and your opportunity to express yourself, and that leading to all these great things. So so I think of the first stage and approach, if we're talking about impact and fitness on society, is a much better, stronger, open-ended conversation on the purpose of fitness, the purpose of physical expression. And I think we're doing it. I think we've been doing it for 10 years, and we don't know if we're making any gains on that. I don't want to pull that form of impact into this, but that's the first thing I think about. Fitness, if we're looking at fitness and its impact on society, I think we're doing a really shitty job, saying that fitness holds the fitness holds the responsibility of that, right? And I think fitness has done a really horrible job in terms of its impact because of how it's now viewed to the majority of the users, right? It's like, oh, you will serve me to fix my shit, and I know you're always there whenever you want to serve me, and that's the relationship between fitness and society. So that's where I'd start there. It's making no impact whatsoever in how I'm defining impact for moving a whole ton of people towards better physical expression, a knowledge of it, etc.
Yeah, no, I think that's super helpful in narrowing it down and making it so it seems not quite as daunting an issue. And as I'm understanding you, to have a true impact when it comes to fitness in relation to society at large, we would need to change really people's beliefs and outlook on fitness from being one of it's purely a means to an end. It's
Yeah.
purely a fix for something broken to something resembling an end in itself, where people have autonomy around it, and it's for them, and
Yes.
it's something you
Yes.
do for a lifetime and things like that.
Yeah, and depending upon where you are in the world, you may see this differently. But let's just use like a couple of things like level of resilience, right? On the, let's call it the terrain, the internal terrain level of resilience, and just human resilience, like the personality trait or characteristic, along with the ability to just get up from anywhere and run a mile, and the size of humans. Over the past 20 years, we could just look at that and say, those are a real stark punch in the face that things aren't getting better. So what's the impact of fitness, and what has it been? What has it had? How has that been? In mine eyes, you finish NSCA course or NASM CPT or whatever, you're like, this is such an admirable job, and we really are changing the world, right? You're not doing much, actually. Just because there's Instagram and you're now getting into your own little bubbles and talking amongst one another, you seemingly think there's impact. You're not making any impact whatsoever if you were to look at those variables, right? Obesity, level of resilience, just two of those over 20 years, man, that's not better. It's not better. And I think maybe, just so if anyone wants to do some more reading on that, it's Steven Pinker's research on over a really long period of time as to what is better, right? That you could bump up against that, but then let's take a shorter time frame, of 1990s into now. It's not better. So therefore, we're not making an impact. If we wanted to use a predictive outcome of that, right? That's why I said, well, how are things looking now? That's how I would look at it, right? So are we making an impact? Well, what are things like now? They're not that good. how are they now compared to what they used to be? They're worse. That's not impact. You know what I'm saying? So just because we have a podcast or we're saying it doesn't mean that's impactful. So I'll stop there, but that's my it's not impactful. Fitness is not impactful on society.
At the moment, yeah. I mean, I know I see what you're saying. I mean, yeah, I know the thesis of Steven Pinker's work there, and
Our Better Angels, I think it was called.
yeah, Better Angels of Our Nature. I've read a lot of his other stuff in psychology, but I mean, I've read books, I've read articles about that book, but I haven't read it specifically. So I don't know if he references fitness or nutrition, but you can just imagine like,
No, he uses poverty and opportunity for food, accessibility to food, as in the health area. So.
Right. So like, again, this is where these like variables of impact matter, because if we talk about like human physical capacity and nutrition, like it's not a steady line of progress. It's a steady line of like, going into the gutter essentially and accelerating very rapidly over the past 100 years. Now, our ability to not die and not have symptoms has improved dramatically over the past 100 years, like to extend out like someone, surviving. But that's a totally different thing.
That is, because that's just the answer to that is medicine, but we still we got to tie in maximum potential and quality of life, right?
Exactly.
So we've only had 150 years really of our experience, and just think about this, right? So people are like, whatever your beliefs are, I listened to an evolutionary anthropologist discuss this the other day. He's like, this is how you can discuss really how small of a timeline we are to adaptation right now, okay? An evolutional concept. So if you were to stretch out evolution of human existence, right, and you were to stretch that from San Francisco over to New York, right, you would get 3 steps in off the beach from San Francisco to discuss the last 150 years of our human adaptation. 3 steps. That just whoa, the horses, right? It's like just a second now. So it takes a lot of those iterations of repeat and et cetera to actually make any, quote unquote, impact on that, when you're really talking about all these biological, deeply embedded, possibly transformative, but very small transformative things. My point being is that we've only had 150 years experience due to medicine and sanitation and et cetera of living past 50 years of age, like on a large scale. So let's not forget that we're not masters of that. We're like 3 steps in off the beach to play that whole game out as to what is it like to live to 90 years of age, with all these biological impedance that we have, which is pecker not coming up when you're 65 in the morning, and hormone levels going out of whack. So it's like anyways, that's the tie into your point on discussing what's going to be positively impactful. We have to create context around the timelines of impact. And
so a question I have for you based on what we were just discussing. So we were discussing 2 separate but related things. We were saying one notion of impact that we would eventually want to go for is changing the intentions around fitness for people, and them not just seeing it as a fix, but seeing it as an end in itself, as a way to cultivate autonomy and all the other things we've discussed. Do you think that, and this question that I'm about to pose has a relevance for how we would actually bring about this impact. Do you think that were we through conversation and consultation to change those beliefs around fitness, we would then bring about as a result things like, people just being able to run a mile from anywhere and having better body composition? So those things are really, those effects are really derivative of that belief system and way of viewing fitness.
Yeah, I think that I wrote down as an approach, it would be it's got to come at it from multiple angles to get there. So there's got to be, and I don't think we're doing a great job at either. It's not that I don't try every day, meaning I'm not trying to inject these critical thinking, systems, or helping coaches be more critical thinkers. I'm doing that day to day with the resources I have and the opportunities I have in front of me. And I do think, yes, that is impactful in that context of like them becoming more aware, and then hoping that with their increased awareness, that will move out into the periphery, right? But I'm only talking 4,000 people over 10 years, right? It's a very, again, it's similar to the evolutionary concept. That's a very small thing, and we're making the assumption that all 4,000 of them are woke to the concept of autonomy, etc. So it has to, and that's called, what that action is, CCP in my day-to-day offerings is a bottom-up approach. It's like an organic, here's the questions we have to ask, this is the belief system, this is the dialogue you need to get to. Like we say, it takes time. It doesn't happen in the first 90 minutes. You warm them up to it. We lay out the storyline, etc. So, but that's happening very small part, right? Very small part. But there has to be, if we're to look at it from a strategic point, there has to be a bottom down approach too. And that's so daunting. I.e., that's what I talk about. Like we talked about, which call was it? The freedom call and liberty, right? Is like, why do I giggle every time? I don't know why. I think it's because it seems so authoritarian and powerful.
Fitness North Korea.
That's why.
Kim
That's
Jong
it.
James.
Get up every day and work towards 2 times body weight deadlift, doing pull-ups and running for 2 hours straight, right? Like that's just what you do. And it's laid out in multiple different ways. But it starts in grade 1. It's like that's top down. Like this is what you do, right? Because these are standards. Oh, but why do we do that? You don't get to ask why. You don't get to ask why. We just know in our belief this is effective for our definition of max physical potential, expression for a lifetime, etc. Because we know you're capable of blah blah. So and that's very generalized, but that's just an idea, right? That's just voice, and that's sound waves and text and you and me. That's it. That's as far as it's going. And maybe some other people who listen in are like, oh, that's kind of back to something else. So I think it has to be a strategic bottom down, or top down, bottom up approach. And I do my day-to-day bottom up. And I think it's making an impact on those particular coaches. I would say that. Yeah.
I mean, it all depends on the time horizon. I mean, I'm not saying these two are equivalent in any way, shape, or form, but I mean, Christianity started out as a, bottom up approach in the middle of nowhere. That, you know what I mean? Like it.
Yes.
We just have to think of the time horizon.
Yes.
But what you just brought up, that you're right, we were discussing the Liberty Call. Kind of this authoritarian top down, forcing people to exercise for an hour a day. That does get back to this notion of utilitarianism, where for utilitarianism, the ends do justify the means, like quite literally. Like, now it all depends. Like, are we beating people if they're not working out? Like, what are the means of,
no, it's an eloquent progression. It's
slap across the face.
No, it's personalized. Some get a slap across the face. Some of them are handheld.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, if you wanted to make an argument for the notion of everyone being required through their government to work out for an hour a day, utilitarianism would be the way to do it, because that is going to lead to better metrics of health, presumably better mental health, things like that. So that would be really an avenue there.
Yep. Why not 2 hours a day?
Why not 2 hours a day? I was just using the example you initially had, but yeah, we could say 2 hours a day. Why not?
I mean, people starting out learning how to do movements, right? Full body resistance. So it may take 2 hours. Oh, you can't do 2 hours? Oh, we'll just take 10 minutes. What do you do next time? You're going to look to do 15 minutes. You know where I'm going with that one. Yeah.
Oh, you can do 2 hours. If the government's making you, you can find 2 hours. If it's jail or 2 hours.
Yeah, we'll find it, but we got to have time, and got to have people reflect on physical expression as being something that's bigger than them and beyond them, and it's not their preconceived great grandmother, mother's perceptions, of what fitness is.
The reason I asked that question earlier about like the belief, if we are able to change the conversation and, help people come to that realization that fitness can be an end in itself, and that potentially leading to getting closer to these objective fitness standards that you've mentioned, like, deadlifting twice your body weight and running for 2 hours. If the one leads to the other, and we're ultimately trying to generate that type of belief in people as our form of impact, then that leads us to the methodology by which we would bring about that impact, which is conversations, deeper philosophical thinking.
Yes.
It would seem that if one were to argue that, well, if we get people, let's say someone tried to do it in reverse. Let's say someone said, well, no, if you get people to achieve these objective physical standards, like, healthy body weight and 2 times deadlift and running 2 hours, that will in turn lead to the proper belief. We got a lot of counterexamples against that one. So, and we know for a fact that there are plenty of people who have achieved such a thing, but don't have proper intentions around fitness. So if we're saying the way we can ultimately make an impact, or the impact we want to make, is to change those intentions, and then that will ultimately change the objective metrics fitness wise and body comp wise, then the means by which we would accomplish that is going to be conversations, deeper philosophical thinking, and things like that.
Yeah, and the reason why you create standards is so that you're not just loosely saying, "Oh, it's just consistency." It turns into subjectivity in terms of your progression, right? It's like, are we moving forward? Yes, because we're consistent. There's nothing there. So that's why I say, the idea of standards and personal standards, and then absolutism comes in there, just to shake people's tree, because to your point, people will think about that, right? They think about the exact standards and then go, I know a lot of people who are unhealthy in that situation, or I know a lot of people who can do more than that, or, there's a number of people who will never achieve that in a lifetime. It's got nothing to do with all three of those, right? You're forgetting that I've thought about this long and hard. So it's like, I thought that those would be an opportunity for reverse engineering, because as you practice of going towards those standards, people will, just indirectly figure out, holy shit, this is a long game. Holy shit, I'm capable of doing this. Holy shit, this will take practice. Holy shit, I can't fast track this. You know what I'm saying? So to your point, which you injected in there, healthy body weight, 2 times body weight, and 2 hours running. I don't include healthy body weight, because that's why I said the body weight, 2 times body weight deadlift and running. I'm presuming that if you partake in that and you have consistency, there's no there's no room for having incorrect body weight. You
It's
can't.
implicitly contained in there.
Yeah, exactly. Just to pick on that, or just to hit that one, as to why I just use those physical expression standards and not a physical presentation standard.
Note to self: find 300-pound person who can run for 2 hours straight, but can also deadlift 600 pounds. No, I'm just kidding.
It's possible.
But it's the exception that proves the rule.
Yes.
Yes. And then I think the second point there that we've discussed before in relation to liberty and this authoritarian stuff as well, like, you might be tempted to say, well, we want to bring about this belief that fitness is an end in itself, and that it leads to autonomy, and we should be pursuing these things. And if we can do that from a top-down method that will lead to greater impact quicker, it might. I guess my main worry is that throughout history, beliefs that are inculcated don't always fare too well. So I feel like the approach you're currently taking, it's going to be slower, and it's going to ask people to critically think, but that's ultimately the right way. Like, wake the people up who want to be woken up and are willing to have this conversation. And I don't know. I don't, and I could be wrong, but I don't know about the ability for us to put this into people's heads from top down in a way that will stick long term. I think the way it sticks long term is if you wake them up to it through conversation, like you're currently doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I'm going to say it again. That's why we need these zombie apocalypse. And we had a number of behaviors go on over the past number of years where we're like, you think people would get it now, but we don't, even past COVID, right? And we're not trying to virtue signal concepts of health based upon that, but we are, it's like, just think really hard about that and take whatever confirmation bias out of it and think really hard about it. then you can see that we're just not going to learn. We're not going to learn, and we're in a society where there's no opportunity for that. So that's why I still, say that I probably have a stronger belief in the, punch in the face method of just saying, don't ask questions, but if you partake in this, regardless of your intentions down the road with the progression I talked about, it'll get to the point of this aha moment of this connection to this leading to autonomy based upon these standards that we set for that. And there, I have, I just have, I guess I just have, where comes up I guess it ties in, Robbie, again back to, like you said, we'll just do it organically and then it'll spread. um I think, and I don't know how to use the words for it, but i have I'm probably more pessimistic in that direction for the definition of impact because of what I know happens um in this minority majority existence of things. Like, we're a very small piece of the pie, and there's a lot more resistance and there's a lot more tension. There's more stories and more information on the other side that just, it minimalizes it down, over time in numbers, like in math based upon that. So that's where I'm more pessimistic in that. Also, we have to, I think, think about what you called, or what we discussed in the same conversation under freedoms and liberty, is the burden that's placed upon the minority for the majority not willing or wanting to see that story. So I think that's where it gets, like, because your words you said, I hope I'm not misplacing them, but you said, we'll just, for those who want to, learn about it, will get those benefits of that aha. You know what I'm saying? So this is where it's like, well, over time, there's going to be a lot more people who don't want to. They don't want to take that, and so therefore, are we saying, is it a competency issue? Is it a accessibility to that knowledge issue? And I've talked about this before. We all the story's been done. All there's YouTube. Like, it's out there. It's out there and accessible to anyone. As terms to what the righteous path is for that. But I don't see it going that direction. So that I'm just creating my hesitations on the rah rah behind the organic movement, and truly knowing what impact means inside of that, right? So as I said, I'll relay it back. I have had impact on those 4,000 coaches, but I'm stopping there. I'm stopping there saying, and that has significant impact on moving us towards a majority for the future. I'll stop at that. I disagree with that.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't disagree with you. I mean, yeah, I don't disagree that the organic way of doing things, yeah, could very well be, and most likely will be slower, and may not reach its eventual, whatever the threshold we want to reach is, 1 million people or 1 billion people viewing fitness in this particular way. Um, I guess what I would say there, I mean, it's hard to tell antecedently how far this will or will not spread, and it's such a short time horizon. I do think, though, you get a lot more true believers, and God, I kind of wince saying that with this approach. Um, you get people who actually are bought in. I the history of people being, like, beaten with a belief, or being told from birth, like, here's what you need to believe and here's what you need to do, doesn't end very well
Yeah.
in religious spheres and political spheres. Like, people, even just as a, maybe they don't even disagree with the view, but just as a fuck you to the fact that they were raised that way, are like, nope, I'm going to
Yeah.
disagree. You know what I mean? So I feel like, even though it will absolutely, I agree with you, probably be far slower as a result, I do think, but the organic approach, you get people who actually, like, oh, I recognize that and I understand it, as opposed to the top down approach, which is like, I don't understand it at all, and it's like told to me that I need to believe this. And yeah, some people will continue to believe that, and some won't. So
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. We've been. Yeah. I guess we could maybe fix it a tiny bit by using analogies of, people have been told to believe in science, and you could try to fight that one. Or things that are more objective. You know. Um, So I think that's where maybe fitness can come in, but we don't have all that, evidence to prove that, right? A long life, and this is what it looks like, and this is what physical expression looks like, and et cetera. So,
And I mean, and that also gets back to like, again, what we're trying to get at here today, like with the notion of impact is, to what we were just discussing, is it just the sheer numbers? Is it the sheer numbers of people believing that fitness is an end in itself? Is that what we're going for? Or is impact, creating an army of people that can then share this view with the world and, who've come to this realization
yeah,
themselves? You know what I mean? That quality versus quantity debate, like, is it just 6 billion people all thinking the same exact thing about fitness? Or is it, the importance of having those conversations in the first place and coaches who can then relate to clients?
yeah,
That is it just the presence of the belief in 6 billion minds, or is it all the conversations and, things that go into creating coaches that way? So
yeah. No, it's a good question. We're asking to, or I think the way I'm taking that is I got to clearly define what I mean by success and for whom when I want to have that discussion.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think something we were talking about before the call that you said you wanted to discuss was obviously last episode we talked about value. This episode we're talking about impact. The relationship between those two. So two questions I put in the outline were: can something be of value without having an impact, and can something have an impact without being of value? And I mean, at least on the face of it, I would answer both of those questions with a yes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where your thoughts would be there, but
Yeah. You can ask the second one again in a second, but the first thing I thought about was yeah, because it's the organic, me coaching coaches idea. So, I think there is value inside of that direct impact. There is some value, and it does, even how we can use the term interchangeably, it does create value for those coaches, and they become more valuable. So the information is valuable, and they become more valuable. So I think there is an aspect of value inside of that on the process of trying to look at, is it impactful? So in that case, and then the second one was what? Second question?
can something have an impact without being of value?
Yes. Yeah.
CrossFit Open. No, I'm just kidding. Has an impact. Is it of value? I don't know. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got to find a different pinata.
Yeah, it can. And there's numerous, maybe you can take a shot at numerous, or maybe a different example outside of that.
Yeah, I mean, again, it all just with everything we've been discussing, it all comes back to like, what do we mean by these terms? Because people do use the terms value and impact
Yeah.
sometimes interchangeably.
Yeah.
I think impact usually goes back to this notion of in the world, empirical, you can see it, results, data, whether it's money raised or life saved or what have you. Whereas value is, at least in the philosophical context, is usually linked more to intrinsic things that have intrinsic value. So autonomy, integrity,
Mm-hmm.
dignity, virtue, that whether they have an impact or not are still of value. Like Kant famously says, whether a goodwill can bring about its ends or not, it is still by far the most valuable thing in the world.
Yes.
So that's really where we get this debate that we've talked about before of what is ultimately worth pursuing. Is it that objective empirical, things out there in the world have changed, or is it, instilling these intrinsic virtues and values and ideas that transcend maybe the notion of impact? So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's in that question, it's the latter. I think it's the, going after the competency on behalf of the client and their intentions, and getting them to the point where they just start having that inner dialogue around, why am I doing this, and what is the utility in this, and I think the questioning of that and the conversation of it and the rummaging of it, the process and the experience, I think that will lead to larger impact. If you, to bring back to your point of 6 billion brains, right, over time, affecting those people, I think, yeah, it begins there.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that's the better route for kind of what we've been discussing in the OPEX model to go, in terms of like, it's not, it's going to be this notion of like having these conversations, instilling these intentions, talking about these virtues, cultivating things like autonomy. That's to use Mill's notion of different orders of things.
Mm-hmm.
That is so much more, that's so much higher order than, hey, we just got someone in the gym and they're doing whatever. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Now that has the trade-off that it's going to be slower and you're not going to get to 6 billion people right away and
Yeah.
all the rest of it, but it is more of value.
Yeah. Yep.
So
Yep. Well, this is a good time, good opportunity to sell the app that we have coming out. It's called You Train You. Me and Robbie are going to be the manufacturers of it, and it's going to be a life gain inside of it for those who know. And basically, you're going to learn how to train yourself, and that's our light punch in the face. This is a great opportunity to sell that as a product, as a sponsor for today. You Train You app. It's coming soon. Look for it, and it's going to be a game changer. It's gonna dissolve the fitness coaching universe and get people excited about exercising every day because they can and because it's for them.
you open the app and it's just a mirror. It's just the camera looking back at you.
You just gave it away,
It's
but
like,
I wanted to
what?
be surprised by that.
I am the source of my own autonomy and my own fitness progression. What? What?
All these directions. Look closer, look closer, look closer.
And then Brandon has made a meme that somehow it's of you getting ready to punch them in the face, and then somehow it actually does punch them
Yeah.
in the face.
It's like we've got we've instilled the high vibration, get rid of water component inside the phone. Yeah.
Man, if you haven't trademarked the "You Train You" yet, you got to get that.
Okay, I'll write that down.
Oh man,
That was good.
yeah, I think that was a good one.
Yeah, I thank you for that, Robbie. Just so we can close it up here, so people don't have to listen to our goodbyes. Appreciate the opportunity to move through that one today. As always, there's lots more to discuss on it, but I hope greedily that those who were listening in continue to ask that question around defining impact. Yeah, when it comes to fitness, just keep asking the question, and hopefully we got some thoughts for you to chew on based upon that.
Yeah, agreed. I really enjoyed that.